Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Neutrality Studies. Today, again, with our friend of the show, Stas Krapivnik. Stas has his own YouTube channel, and he's been on here many times. He's giving us an update now from what the view is looking at world affairs from Russia. Stas, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you. Always fun to be. Always a pleasure to be back. Always fun to watch the world turn into
No, actually,
into a show. I don't know how else to put it these days.
I'm very desperate now because the 2026 I had a sliver of hope because it seemed as if though Trump was not acting on Venezuela and just threatening, and it looked as if though the attack that everybody expected on Iran in December was not coming. So maybe they're holding off. Maybe we're getting to some form of strategic equilibrium. Maybe there's the discussions with Russia, even if they don't lead to a result, maybe there will be some stability at least. But now it seems that everything's coming apart. Stas, what did you make out of the first week of January?
Well, one thing you learn really quickly is that all those MAGA people. I won't say all of them. That's not the right way to put it. But about a good 2/3 were a bunch of hypocrites, because they're the ones that are screaming, "Oh, we don't want any more forever wars. We don't want any more wars at all. We want peace." What they actually meant is we don't want any more Democrat wars. But if Trump starts a war, my God, we're going to back him because we're groupies. It's basically cultists. I mean, look, these are the same people that gave Trump Trump coin, bought up Trump coins, bought up Melania coins, earned Trump $30 billion in a month. These are not rich people. These are people that the last ones that can afford to go into the worst investment that you can possibly make, which is cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is great if you're paying for something, and it's a transactional use, but as a investment of value, it's pointless. Somebody blurps something out and it goes up and it goes down. There's absolutely no foundation for how it moves, where it moves, when it moves. And people are investing because Trump said, "Hey, it's my coin." Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a groupie mentality. That's a cult mentality, sect, and you see that right now. Oh, but Trump, but yeah, any crap they're putting out, I would say at least half of Mega is buying it up, no matter how absurd it is.
The number of
Uh,
people who the number of people who are now saying, the intervention, and let's not kid ourselves. This is a kidnapping and a military aggression against Venezuela, close to the threshold of actual war. 80 people were killed in Venezuela, and the president was abducted. And there's a number of people who are saying, "Oh no, but he had it coming, and he's a bad guy anyhow." And if you've never lived in Venezuela, if you're not one of the people who had to flee, then you have no right to say anything. So shut up. It's good that he's gone, and now we will have peace on earth in Venezuela. I can understand how after Iraq, Syria, Libya, this still there's still people who argue that. Can you somehow make sense of this?
well, yeah, of course. First of all, Americans, as they say themselves in America, have a 30-second attention span. The average commercial. And unfortunately, that is the truth of it. Most of them can't find Venezuela on a map. Guarantee you that. Those a National Geographic survey that was done for 18 to 25-year-olds. This was done about 10 years ago, somewhere around there. And it found that almost a quarter of American 18 to 25-year-olds couldn't find America on a map. You can't find your own country on a map. But then again, you're dealing with a population that between total literacy and partial literacy is 53% of the population. We're not talking immigrants. We're talking, native population. But half of them cannot read or barely read at all. So they don't read, period. In other words, if you're reading at a second or third grade American level, which is about first grade Russian level, that means you're probably not reading a lot of books. You're probably not reading those nasty, ugly things with dates and names and trends and, I don't know, maps. So, whatever Trump says or whomever the media tells you, that's the latest news of the day. Right at 18, that's 1984, which most of them don't read anyway, so they wouldn't know anything about that.
So simply, there's just a relatively large part of the population, 20-30%, who literally doesn't remember, literally doesn't know the context of Iraq, Syria, Libya, the other interventions in South America during the entire Cold War, all of the regime change operations and all of the miseries that they brought, the regime of Pinochet that got installed and killed tens of thousands of people in Chile. They just don't know about this, and that's enough as a political base in order to allow for this to go on and make kind of sense in the overall news environment.
Well, I'll give one shout out to Pinochet that he does deserve. Well, two shout outs. Out of all these governments that the U.S. Helped propped up, Pinochet was probably the least worst, because Pinochet, as he stated, my goal is if every Chilean can afford a house and a car, they'll never go communist, they'll never go Marxist. And he actually worked toward that. And that is, and he did stabilize the economy, and he did leave power willingly without a civil war, without any revolutions. That is an exception, because the vast majority of the people that get set up by the U.S. are not nationalists. That guy, Pinochet, was actually a nationalist. He was out to make life better. He had a different view on what the economy should be than, say, the people that he replaced. But he was a nationalist. He was out for betterment of his own economy. Most of the people the U.S. set up are either globalists or just sold out sellouts with bank accounts in the U.S. They don't give a damn about anything but fattening their pockets, which means fattening the pockets of U.S. corps. And this is not a Cold War era phenomena. The U.S. has been at this for the last 150 years. When they say that if there's a physical intervention boots on the ground, as Trump is now flippantly saying, we don't mind, but we're ready to go boots on the ground. They got 5 deferments from Vietnam, as usual. That's the people that never served that are more than happy to send everybody else's kids in to any kind of butcher shop, not their kids. But in South America, it's not everybody's like, oh, the leftists or the Marxists. No, it's everybody. There are rightists that want revenge against the U.S. There are leftists that want revenge against the U.S. They're centrists, because the U.S. has screwed everybody across the board in Latin America for 150 years. It's the curse of Latin America for the biggest stymie on their development.
How is this being reported now in Moscow, in Russia? I mean, what's the general vibe about this?
Well, I mean, it's being reported as Maduro has been snatched. I'm not gonna say arrested, snatched. Be proper about it. He has been snatched. The country, there's a war. I mean, Trump can say, or the former the Sciona former viceroys, Narco Marco, can say that we're not at war. You're at war. You have attacked the nation. You blockaded them. That's already an act of war. Financial blockade, it's an act of war. You attacked the nation. You murdered its citizens. You kidnapped its legal government, whether it's an elected government or a monarchy or what have you. It's the legal government of the country, and it's up for the country to decide what the legal government is. You kidnapped the leadership. That's all war. That's not acts of war. That is war. Whether or not you say you're at war or not now, the latest as of yesterday is they're demanding tribute.
Yeah,
there's no other way to put it. They're flat out demanding tribute, like a bunch of marauding psychopaths. You give us $3 billion worth of oil, or we'll attack you, and we'll sell it, and for the profit of the people. Translation. So the U.S. is you give us, fill up our tankers, $3 billion worth of oil. We'll sell it and we'll keep the money for your profit. Yeah, okay. We'll all take a cut of it. That's there's an English saying, the problem with paying the Danes' guilt is not what do you do about the Danes, because the Danes are always going to come back for more gold, and the Americans have an appetite to steal everything that's not nailed down in any nation that doesn't resist.
Apart from the oil and the audacity of this whole thing, is like people are saying, oh, the US has taken out one of the allies of Russia and of China. Is there any reason to believe that Venezuela was strategically important to Russia and should be regarded as an ally and not as just a trading partner?
Well, it was an ally. I wouldn't say it was a strategic ally, but it was an ally and a trading partner. By the way, that I love that from Hexa. I think it was Hexa that said, and yeah, we're in there. But what were China and Russia doing in there? Conducting business and buying oil legally. I mean, realistically, China, for example, was buying the heavy crude that they were buying. It's not only in Venezuela, obviously. Venezuela produces it. The oil sands up in Canada produce it. Though they require about 65 to $70 to be a barrel to be profitable. Russian Ural brand is heavy crude. Iranian heavy crude. There are other countries that produce heavy crude, but it's in very small amounts. Those are your major sources of heavy crude. And the southern refineries are set to that heavy crude because they used to get the heavy crude from Venezuela. And the reason they nationalized the oil platforms, what had happened was the deals that the previous government had signed before Chavez were basically giveaways to the U.S. And considering the Yeltsin government signed exactly the same types of deals with Exxon, by the way, and other companies, Shell, in Sakhalin, Russia knows what these deals are like. So the deal that Exxon, Chevron, and Mitsubishi, Matucci had all shoved down Yeltsin's throat or bottom out was that at Sakhalin 1, they would invest $1 billion and they wouldn't have to pay any taxes until they got their money's worth out of it. Well, on paper, 1 billion turned into 5 billion, and they hard coded the cost of a barrel of oil, not market value, but $16 a barrel, when the market value is heading toward $50, $60. So basically, they would be able to pump out a giant amount of oil before they had to pay a single bloody cent in taxes. The way with Chevron, when Putin came in, he didn't want to scare everybody off by hard nationalizing anything. So what they did with Chevron as the first, Putin being a lawyer, they cut onto this little portion where Chevron signed up for environmental laws, but Chevron didn't give a damn because it was a Yeltsin government before that, and it doesn't matter what you sign, just send them another case of vodka and give a percent back as kickbacks to the government officials around them, and everything's fine. Do whatever you want to do. With Putin, it all went very sour because he sent a team down and they started cataloging all the environmental damage Chevron had done in northern central Sakhalin. Chopped down forests where they didn't have a right to do it, contaminated waterways, contaminated the local sea, wildlife death, and so on. And they calculated right up to whatever Chevron invested. So they said start paying back, and Chevron wound up leaving, which is what they wanted anyways. With the others later on, they just gave them a hard point where this is the new contract, take it or leave it. They took it.
So
But
your
the same thing that.
yeah, your prediction is that Venezuela, I mean, they're going to try to do exactly the same, extract the oil at no return, of course, for the country, or minimal return for the country.
Well, they're going to do exactly what they were doing before Chavez nationalized. Well, he didn't even set off to nationalize. He gave hard terms for Exxon to renegotiate basically the giveaway that the previous government had given to the American oil companies. Exxon refused, left, and has been sponsoring all these campaigns against Venezuela ever since. They sponsor quite a few politicians in the U.S. So yeah, they want their privileged position back. The oil that belongs to America, the land that belongs to America, all this other crazy crap that Trump spews out. I guess there was an old game, a computer game that the Japanese came out with back in the 80s, and with the poor English translation. And these aliens come down, and it comes on the screen. All your bases belong to us. that was, and this is Trump. All your resources is belong to
Yeah.
us.
But this is why this is so different this time, right? I mean, this is not the first time the United States is doing is militarily overthrowing a government in Latin America. This is not the first time this is happening. They've done this in the Middle East dozens of times. They've done it during the Cold War, even in Europe, even in Southeast Asia, right? But what is new is that they don't even try to put on the velvet glove of humanitarianism. It's new that they go in and say like, so this is ours, period. I mean, shut up or die. Is Plus they do this now on a different scale. They are already threatening Iran. They're threatening Cuba. There's now a Russian oil tanker that was seized. I haven't
Yeah,
read up on that
with the
story
aid
yet,
of
but
the
maybe you
British.
can fill me in.
Yeah, Bella One. The only thing, the Bella One was not running originally under a Russian flag. When they were getting chased, they switched to a Russian flag, which is the only quote out that the U.S. has in this, without it being basically a declaration of war on Russia. But then again, Trump just had attempted to assassinate Putin. Whether Trump knew about it or not, that's a different case. But the Trump government did. Those 91 drones. The Russian side isn't saying where Vladimir Vladimirovich was located at that moment, but on the Western media it was coming out that he was there in his residency in the Novgorod Oblast, waiting to continue telephone negotiations with Trump, which would be Trump's ROI. I mean, ROI, SOP. That's his SOP. Set somebody up and then trying to murder them off instead of talking to them. It's interesting that the people that never served. I mean, Trump never put a uniform on. He had five. He had five. What's the word? I
Deferments.
haven't had my coffee yet. Deferments. Thank you. He had five deferments from Vietnam. The same guy that goes on stage and says, "Oh, Vietnam was run by a bunch of idiots. I could have done better." Well, maybe you should have shown everybody how much of a genius you are. He's a coward. Let's begin with that. He will. The problem with the Russian government is it still, I think, considers that there can be some kind of negotiations with them. You want to, and the unfortunate part is Russia's doing everything inadvertently doing everything that's going to lead to World War III. Because sooner or later they will cross a red line, like a direct strike on the Kremlin, for example, even if it's not a nuclear strike, a direct strike or on the Kremlin, because they're going to feel they can do whatever they want to. And then the Kremlin is going to be either forced to destroy Russia by destroying its own government, or destroy, at least do a heavy strike on the West and on America. Because they've been trying to avoid escalating with the U.S. U.S. doesn't understand. The U.S. government is incapable of understanding anything but a punch in the teeth. Fortunate part, but that's the people we have in power, and that's people we had in power before that.
I mean, it's absolutely incredible to me that really the U.S. And Europe in close lockstep, they seem to be running willingly toward the Third World War by just crossing every single norm of international relations that we have, and then even turning around and spitting on it. With the media coverage that they're giving it. I mean, it's just insane that we've even gone to the point where they abduct sitting presidents and launch these attacks, and this is a long series of things. And they openly say like, yeah, Iran is going to be next, locked and loaded, and we're just going to do that. And anyone who's not on board is a bad guy, and we will hammer you down too. And Europe, by the way, you have to give us Greenland, and whether you like it or not, but that's going to be a fact. And the Europeans currently are debating whether they should applaud it or protest slightly. That's the discussion in Europe.
Well, from certain sources, I've heard Iceland is next on the list as a. This has nothing to do with security. Let's just begin with that. U.S. has had bases in Greenland since the 50s. It's absolutely, and it has as many bases at once. The Danes sure as hell aren't going to say anything, especially if they're making getting rent payments off of it. U.S. has had nukes. The U.S. has had radar stations. It does whatever it wants in Greenland, but it doesn't get the resources. Greenland has a lot of oil offshore. Let's just begin with that. Plus a lot of resources on the island itself. Unfortunately, for most of those resources, realistically speaking, are deep underground. new Russian bleeding edge technology that's now being test fielded in the Kuril Islands allows the extraction of certain rare earth elements, metals, in a gaseous form directly out of the vent gas from volcanoes. Iceland has lots of volcanoes. It comes out pretty much in all volcanoes because it's coming out from the mantle and it's liquefied rare elements, the rare earth elements. So there's that moment too. You got a volcano, you can start extracting Russian technology. It's panned out. It's just whether or not it can be economically viable. That's what's being tested now. You can get the rare earths. Problem is, of course, the U.S. can't process those rare earths. That's a different case. And grabbing the Chinese tanker, the 20 main American arms manufacturers have all just gotten banned from rare earth magnets. That's going to take the U.S. a while to invest in any kind of actual purification, extraction, and manufacturing of magnets.
Yeah, but I mean the just the level of belligerency, the level of also pure land grab, resource grab, is through the roof, while at the same time not coming to a conclusion in the proxy war, in the Ukraine proxy war, or even firing it up. I mean, do people in Russia still believe that with this government in Washington, there's any kind of coming to a negotiated settlement? But it seems that Mr. Putin still goes that route.
The government seems to still be going that route. But even then, okay, look, if Trump actually cannot control the Europeans or Ukrainians, and it's a question whether he's really even trying, anything you sign with the Americans is pointless because the war continues. And again, if Trump actually wanted to stop this, he could cut off all intelligence sharing, including through the Five Eyes. He's done that before to the British, when the British, under Starmer, as a matter of fact, the British weren't playing ball and they were getting too close with the Germans. They just came in one day and they were all cut off from the American systems. That's it. You're switched off. That's how fast they can do it if they really wanted to do it. Once Stormer got back on the playing ball with DC, they got switched back on. I mean, they could quite literally just switch them on, switch them off at any point. They can cut off the intelligence sharing. There's even a line item for about $1 billion in the Pentagon budget for Ukraine. Not to mention, most of this isn't paid off by line item numbers. It's paid off by secondary supplementary spending, which is a lot. Which, if you add the supplementary spending in the U.S. to the actual budget for the War Department, it's huge. And when you consider the Veteran Affairs, which normally is under the same budget in most countries, is a separate entity in the U.S., it's giant. There was an NGO a few years back, I think it was under Obama, maybe it was under Trump's first term, went through line item by line item of the U.S. budget, all 10,000 pages of it, uh, and counted up how much of it was military. And the U.S. Was coming out about 26% of the government budget was military.
Which brings us actually to the next topic. I mean, Trump just announced a 1.5 trillion US dollar military budget. He increased it from 1 to 1.5. I'm just speechless. It makes no sense.
It makes great sense.
That is under no threat whatsoever. You're the furthest away from any kind of real non-self-made threat that you've ever been. And that's where they're going.
Look, the empire's in decline. It's obvious to everybody. De-dollarization is doing nothing but accelerating. The dollar's worthless. I mean, look, the dollar, the first priority of the private banking system called the Federal Reserve, and most Americans have no idea that they're under a private banking system. It's not even a government system, is to maintain the power of the dollar. Well, the purchasing power of the dollar compared to 100 years ago is about 1 or 2%. I think they failed. What do you think? I think they pretty much totally failed on that little mission statement. Most companies, most companies, and they're a company working for the government, if you think about it, would get fired by now. and have their bonuses taken back. But no, they continue on, and they're the big financial banks. Officially, the financial sector in the U.S. is 21, 22%. Reality is probably closer to 30, 35%. And this is a sector that produces nothing but debt. Big finance, big finance is the antithesis of industry because their job, they raid industry and destroy it to get their bonuses, to get them cash on in hand. Versus some small little bank in some village that invests in that village because the owners of the bank live in that village. So they're investing in local business. Big finance doesn't give a damn about you and your little town. They'll raid you just to get the money out. That's what big finance does.
So is what we are seeing right now the resource grab, like this desperate attempt at getting their hands at more things that can be financialized, that can be restructured, that can be sold off as debt. Is it in your view the final moments of that empire before the internal disruption comes? And we're seeing now ICE agents running around shooting Americans. This morning, apparently, a lady got shot in her face and died in her car because the ICE agents shot her. I mean, it's getting. I've just not seen this level of also internal escalation.
Well, you got to remember that under the Biden administration, they put out for something like 800, 900 IRS agents. New, maybe it was even more. Uh, it was for armed IRS agents that are going to be running around shooting people for not paying their taxes. Yeah, that not the police don't normally execute search warrants or arrest warrants, but armed IRS agents. So I guess IRS now has its own AMON or SWAT teams that will go in, raid your house, and take your last pair of underwear because you didn't pay the taxes, and maybe shoot you dead on the spot. What most Americans, because most Americans never read history, and these days I don't think most Europeans read history either. That just comes with degeneracy of mental capability in the West. What empire does on the fringes sooner or later comes back to the center. And what we're seeing is the heavy-handed tactics that the empire has used, the empire of lies has used all over the world, including Iraq, places like Afghanistan, murdering off locals. They all come back home. Because, by the way, the people that have been desensitized, have been the enforcing class in those areas, then get hired to be the police or the special agents internally. A lot of those FBI agents have military backgrounds where they've done occupation services in different areas, and so do local police. And the local police have been militarized heavily. They go through boot camps, military style boot camps.
Yeah,
Welcome back.
I just want to ask. Because sometimes we also have a tendency to over dramatize things, right? Because whatever's in the news currently is the biggest thing ever, and other things they go to the background and so on. So we tend to say like, okay, this is extraordinary. But this time it really feels to me that this is a new level of general escalation of the way that things are running, the way that city systems are kind of running themselves into the ground, because there seems to be no more long-term strategic thinking behind anything of it. Everything seems to be geared toward very extreme short-term policies to mitigate the last kind of problem that they were running into. And I mean, the US and Europe, including stuff like now using Europe's Russia sanctions policy against internal dissent, which is again the same pattern, right? The empire turns the guns towards its own towards its own citizens. Do you agree this is just relatively? This is new. I mean, this is not something that we can easily compare to the 80s, 90s, or 2000s.
It's new in that this is just new for this iteration of empire.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's not new in history. It's a constant repeat. And to say that, oh, it's a democracy, a republic, it can't be an empire is a lie, A. B, realistically speaking, there is no constitutional republic in the U.S. It's one-man rule. Sure, the man isn't crowned an emperor. He seems to think of himself as that. Sure, he may be, a new one will be elected by the oligarchy that sits behind it. But there's
You know, I'm a monarchist. And there's reasons why I'm a monarchist.
All
Oh,
right.
you'd be surprised. You know, you would be surprised amongst the intellectual classes in Russia. I would probably say the majority are monarchists.
All right.
And there are very good reasons for monarchy. One, you don't get a Trump type because monarchy is self-regulating by tradition, by the church, by different social classes. It is self-regulated. It's an inherited system where each generation is building onto it, so you can do long-term economic planning, which you can't do in the West. Look, when you've got when you're looking at long-term economic planning on any major projects, you're looking at ROIs of 10, 15, 20, 30 years. When you have presidency get reelected every 4 years to maybe twice, they have no incentive to do any long-term planning and any long-term investment because they're not going to get the credit for it. Why the hell do I want to give the credit to the next guy? And the next guy might not even be from my party.
Yeah, but this is the main problem of like trying to combine democracy with market with pure cold-blooded capitalism. That's when you get a combination that will discard any kind of long-term thinking. If you combine it with some form of market socialism plus the idea of the nation or the people, then you will get people who will try at least to have certain projects, right, and manage them. But that's not what we've got. We've got a form of massive aggressive capitalism that is going to eat away all and anything without regard to the medium or long term consequences. And it seems that we are in the middle of that because the high capital in the United States, including Elon Musk and so on, are cheering this up.
They're paying for it. Well, look, we've been told how this works. The Republic, it flat out was put out 2,000 years ago how all of this works. The three worst forms of government is Publius, oligarchy, and tyranny. They don't run from a strict. They don't show up in a constitutional monarchy. They don't show up in monarchies. Period. Tyrannies always rise from the people. That's the reality of it. First of all, and how it works normally is the people have the power, which usually turns into very quickly the oligarchs have the power. And then sooner or later, some populist rises up and says, I will free you from the oligarchs. Give me the power. I will free you. And he becomes a tyrant that then just is there to enrich himself at the cost of the people. Which, by the way, why they start importing lots of foreigners that have nothing to do with you. Because if they're importing foreigners from very poor countries, those foreigners will be loyal to the government that imports them, not the citizens, not the country, but to the government. Because even as standards are falling in your government and your economy, for those foreigners coming in, it's still better than where they came from. They'll be loyal to the government, while the citizens are going to go, wait a minute, didn't you promise something else? At which point you get the butt end of a rifle in your teeth and you go, oh, okay, got it. And that's the problem with any of these types of governments. I mean, I'm a constitutional monarchist. And the other thing about monarchy, there was an interesting, I think it's still on my playlist. There was an interesting video when the economists went through historically the difference between monarchies and republics. Monarchies, the more enfranchised the government becomes, there is more people are voting, or bigger the parliamentary side, legislative side is, the higher your taxes, the more infringement on your human rights, and the more totalitarian the government becomes. The standard monarchies had tax rates. I know this is going to be unbelievable to humanity right now, 10% or lower. Overall taxes. The government didn't give a damn about what you did day in, day out. The government is built on tradition and built on religion. It's not going to tell you can't worship God. It's not going to tell you, oh, don't do this or don't do that, because that's the foundation of how the government gets legitimacy. Now, the more people are involved in that government, they have their staffs, they have their pet projects, they grow their bureaucracy. That all takes money. Plus, you got to show some kind of, motion. Oh, what does a legislative body do to show motion? Well, the easiest thing to show motion, especially if you're not mentally, intellectually very capable, is to ban something. So now the government is getting more and more into your daily life, going, okay, you can't do that. We don't like that. And if they get some kind of progressive woke tinge into them, they really try to do social engineering on you, and that breeds then a lot of anger, and it also breeds things like 62% tax rates in Finland on people's income. Where you're basically now you were maybe a subject of the crown, now you're a slave of the legislature or the government, and basically most of the West are slaves. They're tax slaves. Try not paying your taxes, you probably get shot by the IRS. I mean,
Yeah, I do have some counter thoughts here, being myself basically a social democrat, but let's not go there. Let's not discuss the best forms of government, but really the
reason I'm
we're
saying
having
this,
at the moment in 2026, that the world seems to be coming apart, and it comes apart so hard that even people who've been been fairly consistent with like trying with their analysis, and also with the not the belief, but the view that at some point some form of stabilization in form of the the multipolar world will set in, like Chas Freeman and others are getting to the point where they get so frustrated that they're saying like, no, you cannot get the stability is not working if one of the poles is actively trying to get all out warfare. What do you see, like, how does Russia and China, how do they approach this? I mean, the next victim is already decided, it's going to be Iran. Is there anything that Russia and China can do in order to make sure that Iran doesn't get, I mean, they might get nuked. Israel at this point could nuke Tehran and just say like, no, we told you they were evil. And Europe would go along with it, and the US will go along. I mean, the general publics will go along with it. Is there anything that is still holy in terms of like limits to violence?
Well, if you look, the reason I was saying what I was saying, if you look at the people in charge in the West, they are at the tyranny class. You've reached the part of the cycle where you have tyrants in power, and many times unelected tyrants. The EU Commission is a great example. If the West, or particularly America, has lost its mind fully in this case. I mean, first of all, Trump is crude enough to be honest and just saying the silent part out loud. He's not hiding behind human rights and all this other kind. He tries to kind of.
Well, he hides behind drugs.
Well, here's a little headline that came out of the New York Times the other day. Justice Department drops claim that Venezuela Cartel de los Soles is an actual group. Oh, no Cartel de los Soles that Maduro is supposedly in charge of. We just made it up. The hell, you illiterate semi-humans over there, that the worker class, just shut the hell up. We do what we want. We'll just make things up. And then here's the New York Times, the mouthpiece of the CIA, just admitting it. Yeah, okay, so it doesn't exist.
Yeah, but that means there's no taps on people, right? There's no, not even like the idea that I have to look good toward my own people. Not even that is a constraint anymore. I mean, this is very unsettling.
Well, the problem is with a large chunk. I'm not going to say all of MAGA, because Trump has lost quite a bit of support. People that have realized this is what I voted for. But the majority of MAGA and Democrats, by the way, have the same thing. There's a very large underlying layer of Americans that are Team America. Have you ever seen that video, the movie Team America, the puppet movie? It came out in like 2015, something like that, 2012. If you haven't, go watch it. It's a parody of American approach to foreign policy, but it is the reality of it. It's not really even a parody. It's just they make fun of it by really showing what it more or less what it is. It's an insane asylum, blow things up, and they will cheer whatever gets blown up, because but particularly these beta males that have never been brave in their lives, have never had to sacrifice anything. They now feel empowered by the government. It's like a football team thing. I never get involved in watching sports. It just bores the crap out of me. But the people that go, they live and die by their sports team. It's the same mentality.
Yeah. Yeah, but
It's the same groupthink mentality.
But that leaves us in a situation where really, like, there are no more limits to what is thinkable in the application of violence, of international application of violence. How will Russia confront this?
There are limits. Okay, Russia sent a submarine. The unfortunate part, the submarine didn't do anything. I guarantee you, if that submarine had put out a radio threat that, those that American team lands on that tanker, we sink your destroyer. And if they sunk that destroyer, things would stop on a dime. There would be panic in Washington.
Are you sure?
Instant panic in Washington. Absolutely.
Are you sure they wouldn't just send a missile straight into Moscow?
If they send a missile straight into Moscow, they all die.
Yeah, but they seem to think that they won't. They seem to think that this is fine. So the what is it called? Escalation dominance is with the US apparently.
There is a limit. If they sent a nuclear weapon, they know they're going to get a nuclear response. Matter of fact, they'll get an automatic nuclear response because you can wipe out Moscow, and in about 30 minutes, you all start to die because Moscow has a dead hand. That's automated dead hand. The dead hand is a ballistic missile that flies the length of Russia, giving out command codes to launch everything into America and to Europe. Everybody dies. That's it. And you can't, there are thousands of Russian missiles on carriers, be it on roads, on ships, on rail. You can't find them. They're everywhere. Not to mention submarines. Look, one Russian submarine could turn the U.S. into a medieval economy. 2 Russian submarines can make most of the U.S. uninhabitable for the next couple hundred years, at least, to be realistic. That's the power of nuclear cruisers carrying nuclear ballistic warheads. Not to mention even the smaller Russian submarines carry Zircon hypersonic missiles, which can still be tipped with a tactical nuclear warhead. Except the Russian tactical nuclear warhead is 75 kilotons, 2 Hiroshimas. I mean, that's a big tactical nuclear warhead. And that's the point. That's about the only thing that's keeping Washington right now in any kind of sanity. That's it.
So
because
you believe there's enough sanity to say, like, we must not trigger this?
Yes, for a simple reason of
that's hopeful.
Elon Musk is going to do what with his money when there's no America left and there's no Europe left? What good is your? In fact, I mean, you got Macron, for example, building, there was a report at government expense, of course, he was building a luxury bunker for 1,500 square meters, a luxury bunker. So he's going to have servants down there. Well, here's a little interesting thing. Why would they serve you? Okay, so you can get the people to serve you with the threat of, well, if you don't, we won't let you in the bunker. But once the nuclear war goes off and they're in the bunker, you're a parasite, they take over and kill you, and they run the bunker. That's the point. You are no longer needed as the billionaire who's no longer a billionaire because all your wealth has just got evaporated in a nuclear holocaust.
Okay,
what are you needed for? You're not needed for anything at that point. And that a lot of these people, maybe they do understand that. And if there's a nuclear war, that's it. Their money, their wealth is gone. And that's probably the only thing that they value, because if you're a religious person, they obviously don't value their souls for the things that they do. But I mean, if you're looking at it from that point of view, but the thing is if Russia doesn't punch the teeth back in, sooner or later, they will cross a point where Russia has to seriously move up the scale to probably nuclear weapons. It feels like it does. It's better to take the bully out when he's just starting than when he's in full rage mode. It's much easier to calm him down at that point. As far as Iran, Iran is an existential crisis for Russia, just a little lower than Ukraine. Iran goes, the Caucasus goes, Central Asia goes, and the U.S. flat out is saying this. Well, they're going to go up right up into the Russian belly and try to let out Russia's intestines through Kazakhstan, through Georgia. I mean, those will be revolution after revolution. So Russia, no way in hell is Russia going to let Iran fall. Sure, Israel could nuke Iran. There will no longer be an Israel. Because Iran has enough ballistic missiles, heavy ballistic missiles to exterminate whatever is in that sliver of land. Because, by the way, they'll also take out the nuclear power plant sitting in the middle of Israel, and that'll contaminate the majority of Israel out of existence. Israel will die. Iran may not have nuclear weapons, but it has enough conventional weapons to assure mutual destruction.
Do you
Mutual
so you
destruction.
think they, because like Bibi Netanyahu was in the US just before the new year or over the new year, and it seems sure enough that that's what they've been discussing, like how to attack
Oh, yeah.
Iran, and they're certainly going to do another sneak attack, right? They're going to try to amass everything, pretend that they want to negotiate. The second they say, like, okay, here we are, that's the moment they're going to strike, and they're going to try to take out everything, including activating all of the internal assets that they still have in Iran, in order to, pull a mega Syria and combine with a mega Venezuela, where they managed to disable. They disabled the entire Venezuelan military defense system, everything, through bribery and whatnot. But the matter of the fact is, not a single one of these troops who took out Maduro died. No single casualty. It's like a massive success. If that can be repeated in Iran, then, well, I mean, at least from the megalomaniac perspective of the Trump administration, I would believe that they would think that they can do that.
You're right. The sequel is rarely as good as the original. One, to put it crudely, they blew their load when they did what they did. They
Half a
killed
year
a lot
ago,
of
you mean?
people. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of those liberals are right. Look. First of all, from the Russian standpoint, because there was a lot of this. Oh, Russia didn't support Iran. Well, Russia attempted to sign with Iran a treaty on the same status as North Korea, mutual defense, military defense. The liberals were in power in Iran, the pro-Western liberals. They instead signed, they watered down the wording to, we will, I think it's it's section 5, I think the first paragraph, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I read that document. We will struggle against mutual regional threats, whatever that means. That doesn't mean anything. And while Russia signed the document and the document was approved by the Duma, the Iranians wanted to be loved by the West, and they got really loved by the West. They signed that document the day after they were being attacked. So there was no mutual aid between Russia and Iran. There is now. S-300, S-400 systems are in. I don't know what the Chinese have brought in, but they're bringing in equipment. Russia, and it's been published. It's not it shouldn't be any big news. Iranian pilots for Su-35s are in training in Russia. Russia is moving S-35 interceptors into Iran. These are generation 4+++. Something that Europe can't build, period. Europe is incapable of building this level, let alone a generation 5. Europe is well behind on any of this. But Russia and the U.S. both and China are working on 6th generation fighters. Europe can't build a 5th generation fighter or anything close to it. They can't get a working model.
Okay.
So this is already more enough to match the F-35s, which are flying junk for the most part. But the point is Iran's defenses are being rebuilt, and Iran is increased. I don't know if this is true or not, but I was reading a report a month or so ago that they were upping their missile production to all ranges to 3,000 a month. Their ballistic missiles and their cruise missiles. So it's more than enough to overwhelm anything the U.S. has and Britain and Israel has for anti-aircraft missiles to try to chop down.
Yeah,
so
as long as they're well enough distributed and cannot be disabled quickly enough, right? Because that's the dream,
they are.
right?
Well, and we saw that, the 12-day war, Israel was screaming and whining for the U.S. to do something because they were being hammered into the ground. And Iran didn't fire off even half of what it had. Iran was actually pretty conservative in what it was firing back into Israel. And Israel was firing from airframes from a distance. And the missiles of the airframes are flying, the planes, air platforms. they're relatively small missiles. They don't do that much damage. They're not the 2,000-pound bombs that Israel drops on buildings in Lebanon or in Gaza, because there's still enough air defense working at that point in Iran that they were still afraid to really fly in, because they would lose planes. And that air defense system has been rebuilt and rebuffed and upgraded. And now Russia and Iran have a very close relationship, because most of those liberals lost power. Iran arrested the people that were responsible. A lot of them been executed. And they drove out the Afghan Pakistani refugees that were the primary source of American and British and Israeli fifth column. Now, Iran does have issues right now. I mean, Iran's not a monolithic society. No big society is. And we've seen that there are terror acts being conducted inside Iran right now. In fact, there was a video that just came out in one of the towns of Bakiristan, I think was the name of the province. The police chief was assassinated by Islamic jihadist gunmen, which are usually Sunnis, in this case, in Shia Iran. So there are issues, and Israel's been sponsoring those terrorist groups for decades. And so is the U.S. while we're at it. So there are issues, but they're not going to topple the government. In fact, the liberals even got behind the government because when you're getting indiscriminately bombed, all of a sudden you realize who your real enemies are.
Yeah, but they still there is
flag.
significant protests at the moment, right? Street protests
there are.
in Iran. So
There are.
even if they are supported by like Western NGOs and whatnot, I mean, they still represent a portion of the population that is angry enough to go to the streets, right? And in the middle of being threatened by Israel and the United States. Anyhow, I mean, I'm sorry to be pessimistic. It's just the new year started really poorly. But Stas,
Yes, it did.
it is after all Christmas in Russia, Orthodox Christmas yesterday, right? The 7th.
Yesterday was Christmas Day.
So today is the second
Merry
day
Christmas, by the way. Sorry for not saying that.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to you too. I should have started off with that one, but Merry Christmas after all. Stas, people who want to find you, they should go to your YouTube channel.
Yeah. Mr. Slavic Man, Slavic with a K, and 2 Telegram channels. Stas Today Obratno is the Russian channel. Stas was there is the English language channel, and also an X, Stanislav Krapivnik.
Okay,
So,
and I will try to link all of those in the description box below. Stas, despite the depressing topics, thank you very much for the update.
Pascal, it'll all be good. I was just in Mariupol, and that, if you want to see the future, I put a video out. If you want to link that, from my YouTube channel. 98% of residential buildings have been rebuilt. Lots of greenfield projects have been built. Giant children's hospital. About 70% of other buildings have been rebuilt. The downtown is like a grab box of candy. It looks better than it's looked probably in the last 60 years, 70 years, maybe 80 years. And even the private one-family housing is about a third rebuilt or in process of being rebuilt. Those are private, so they get money. The problem is a lot of families were killed, particularly the Ukrainian side shooting directly into their houses. But the city's alive. It has huge new sports centers, and the one of the directors of the main contractor building the city, Единый Поставщик, he was telling me he even had a complaint. They have new problems in the city. It's called traffic jams, because people are returning in mass. So there is hope, and in Avdiivka under daily drone attacks. And I was there. We had drones flying overhead. We had one shot down on the next street over, and then there was airplane-style drones coming in. There was a firefight that lasted about 15 minutes, with them being taken down. And even Avdiivka and all of that destruction, I counted 6 rebuilt buildings. They were damaged, but not critically damaged. They'd bricked up the holes, rebuilt the interior, and people were back to living. Another 3-4 buildings are under reconstruction. And this is while there's daily floods. And a new building that they just put up, they started raising it from a foundation, brand new foundation, 100-meter long, six stories high. They're finishing putting in the windows and the balconies on the left edge of it, and the rest of the building's ready to go. And they're doing internal work on it. And this is while daily drone attacks are happening. So there's hope. There's hope. It's all being rebuilt.
There must be peace after war. I just I hope we can get to it straight without the war in between. Much
That would
peace,
be nice.
much peace, and Merry
Much
Christmas.
peace. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas.